Okay, children. So, in the first period, we studied about Ibn Battuta's Rihla, isn't it? So now we are going to study about François Bernier. Okay, so in this chapter we are studying about three travelogues, about three travelers and their travelogues. That is Al-Biruni's Kitabul Hind, Ibn Battuta's Rihla, and François Bernier's History in the Mughal period. Okay, so can you see this picture? This is François Bernier. Okay, he came from which place? I already told you he came from France. Okay, and he was a doctor by profession. Okay, so François Bernier, a doctor with a difference. So before that, I'll tell you certain other travelers who came to India to see all the unfamiliar things in India. See, Portuguese travelers, they gave detailed account of India. They translated Indian text to European languages. For example, Duarte Barbosa and Roberto Nobili. Okay. Who were the Portuguese travelers who came to India? They came in 1500. Okay, they came in 1500. Who were the Portuguese travelers? Famous Portuguese, lots of Portuguese travelers came to India, but these were the most popular, okay, or famous ones. Duarte Barbosa and Roberto Nobili. 1 mark question, okay. Then Dutch, French and English travelers came to India. So initially it was the Portuguese travelers who came to India, then following them Dutch travelers, French and English travelers came to India. One of the most famous traveler was the French jeweler Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who traveled to India at least 6 times. See, this Jean-Baptiste Tavernier came to India for trading purpose. He was a jeweler. Okay, so he came to India for 6 times in order to conduct trade in India, and he was the most famous of the traveler. Okay. Now, some of these travelers, like the Italian doctor Manucci, never returned to Europe and settled down in India. So, from time immemorial, these people, travelers, they had an attraction towards India. So, most of the travelers from Portugal, from England, from France, from Denmark, etc., they all came to India to see the unfamiliar things which they are not used to. Okay, and out of that, the most famous one was the French jeweler Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. And if they ask the examples for Portuguese travelers, you have to write Duarte Barbosa and Roberto Nobili. Then some of the travelers, when they came to India, actually they just came to India to see all the things, but some of them fell in love with India that they did not return back to their own country. For example, Italian doctor Manucci. He never returned back to Italy and he settled down in India. Understand? Now we are going towards François Bernier. François Bernier, a Frenchman, I told you that he came from France, isn't it? Was a doctor, political philosopher and historian. Like many others, he came to the Mughal Empire in search of opportunities. So, he was a Frenchman, he was a doctor, political philosopher and historian. He came during 17th century in India, that is Mughal era, Mughal period, okay, in search of opportunities. He was in India for 12 years from 1656 to 1668 and was closely associated with the Mughal court as a physician to Prince Dara Shikoh, the eldest son of Emperor Shah Jahan, and later as an intellectual and scientist with Danishman Khan and Armenian noble at the Mughal court. See, he was in India for 12 years from 1656 to 1668 and was closely associated with the Mughal court. That is why he came to India, isn't it, to look for more opportunities. So he was there in the Mughal court. As a physician, to Prince Dara Shikoh. Who was Dara Shikoh? Son of Emperor Shah Jahan. And later as an intellectual and scientist with Danishman Khan, an Armenian noble at the Mughal court. Understand? So this is about if for exam write a short note for François Bernier came, then you can write all these things. Dara Shikoh was a Frenchman, he was a doctor, political philosopher and historian. He came to Mughal court or he came to the Mughal Empire in search of opportunities. He was in India for 12 years from 1656 to 1668 and was closely associated with the Mughal court as a physician to Prince Dara Shikoh, the eldest son of Emperor Shah Jahan. Understand? All these things you can write. Now, see, when Al-Biruni and Ibn Battuta came to India, they, of course, in Kitabul Hind, Al-Biruni compared the Sanskrit texts with other culture, of course, but it was a good comparison. He wanted to show the difference between Indian culture and the other culture. Okay. Then Ibn Battuta, he never compared different cultures. Whatever he saw in India, he wrote down. Okay, only that much. But François Bernier was not like that. He always compared India with the West. He always compared India with the West. Okay, so and he always criticized Indian ways and he said that European ways or Western ways were far more superior than the Indian ways. François Bernier was unsatisfied with everything in India. He always thought that European culture and whatever happened there was superior to India's. See, comparing East and West. Bernier travelled to several parts of the country and wrote accounts of what he saw, frequently comparing what he saw in India with the situation in Europe. He dedicated his major writing to Louis XIV, the King of France, and many of his other works were written in the form of letters to influential officials and ministers. In virtually every instance, Bernier described what he saw in India as a bleak, that is boring, empty situation in comparison to developments in Europe. See, I told you earlier that Bernier thought that whatever is Western is superior to that of Indian, isn't it? So, he always compared the developments in Europe that to the ways in India. That is, he thought that there was no development in India like the Western countries. Okay, as we will see, this assessment was not always accurate. However, when his works were published, Bernier's writings became extremely popular. See, that is the problem. See, whatever Bernier wrote was his own perception. Okay, that was not the perception of the Indians, or that is not what happened actually in India. I'll tell you one example of that. See, you must have seen Slumdog Millionaire. Did you see that film? Okay, if you have seen that film, you know that that film showcased abject poverty in India, isn't it? One child is dropping into whatever that is, you know what, how it happened in Slumdog Millionaire. But actually, and you know that it went for Oscar nomination also. For music, we got Oscar award, etc. But do you think that what is happening in that Slumdog Millionaire is happening everywhere in India? Of course not. Poverty is there. Of course poverty is there, but everywhere in India it is not like that. Everywhere in India we don't have slums. People do, almost all the people don't live in slums, isn't it? So But when Bernier wrote about these things, these were the books read by the Europeans, Western people, and they thought that that was the truth. Understand? Did you understand what I am trying to say? Okay, so that is, whatever Bernier wrote was not accurate. Of course, there were poverty, there were problems in India, but that was not all that was there in India. Okay, but the people in Western countries read these books and they believed that India is like that. Now, Bernier's works were published in France in 1670-71 and translated into English, Dutch, German and Italian within the next 5 years. See, I told you, Bernier's books were widely read by the people because it was translated into English, Dutch, German and Italian. See, the books written by Al-Biruni and Ibn Battuta were not that much widely read because they wrote in Arabic, they wrote in Persian language, and it was in 11th and 14th century. So even though they have written everything in a good way, these books were not read by the people extensively. Okay. That is only a small group of people read all these books. But the books written by Bernier, where he has criticized Indian ways thoroughly, were read by many people. Okay, because it was translated into English, Dutch, German and Italian. That is, all over Europe people read his books and they got a misconception about India. Between 1670 and 1725, his account was reprinted 8 times in French, and by 1684 it had been reprinted 3 times in English. See, look how popular his books were. It was reprinted 8 times in French and 3 times in English. That much people read his books. This was in marked contrast to the accounts in Arabic and Persian, which circulated as manuscripts and were generally not published before 1800. See, the books written by Al-Biruni and Ibn Battuta, they were manuscripts, and you have studied in 10th standard and all about the difference between manuscripts and printed books, isn't it? Manuscripts can be read only by a very small group of people, whereas printed books can be read by many people. So his books became, Bernier's books became very popular in Western countries. And what was the content of Bernier's books? That is, everywhere he criticized Indians, that is their standard of living, how they conducted themselves, their religion, their beliefs, their social customs, everything was criticized by Bernier. Okay. Now, Bernier and the degenerate East. If Ibn Battuta chose to describe everything that impressed and excited him because of its novelty, François Bernier belonged to a different intellectual tradition. Okay, that is there because Ibn Battuta came to India because he liked traveling and because he wanted to see all the things which were not familiar to him, isn't it? He was curious about things, whereas François Bernier was not like that. He looked everything in a critical way. Okay, he always compared, I told you earlier, he always compared East to West, Indian ways to Western ways, and he felt Indian ways were lacking in everything. So he was far more preoccupied with comparing and contrasting what he saw in India with the situation in Europe in general and France in particular, focusing on situations which he considered depressing. So always, whenever he sees something, he used to compare and contrast the things which he sees in India to that of Europe, particularly France. He came from France. So whatever he sees in India, and the good things he never mentioned. Okay, that is the problem. Whatever he felt depressing, he focused on that and he wrote about that and compared and contrasted with whatever happens in Europe, particularly France. His idea seems to have been to influence policymakers and the intelligentsia to ensure that they made what he considered to be the right decisions. So why did he write all these things like this? Because at that time, 17th century, colonialism started, isn't it? So he wanted to influence policymakers and the intelligentsia to ensure that they made what he considered to be the right decision. So based on the things written by François Bernier, he wanted the government officials as well as other important officials to make a policy considering his opinion about India. That is the thing. Okay, he wanted the policy makers and the intelligentsia to formulate the policies about India based on the books written or based on the memoirs or things which he has written. Understand? So, Bernier's Travels in the Mughal Empire, that is the name of the book of Bernier, Travels in the Mughal Empire. So I'll again ask you, what is the name of the book written by Al-Biruni? Kitabul Hind. Ibn Battuta, Rihla. And Bernier's book, Travels in the Mughal Empire. One mark question. Okay. It provides a detailed observation and critical insights. Okay. Then he constantly compared Mughal India with contemporary Europe. He emphasized the superiority of the European society. See, always he compared Mughal India with that of the contemporary Europe, and he emphasized the superiority of the European society. Now, I am going towards the concept of land ownership. See, I am going to tell you the concept of Bernier about the land ownership in Mughal era during that period. See, according to Bernier, one of the fundamental differences between Mughal India and Europe was the lack of private property in the Indian society. He had a firm belief in the virtues of private property. Crown ownership of land was harmful for both state and its people. He thought that the Mughal Emperor owned all land and distributed it among the nobles. 3. Land ownership. That is ownership of the land. Okay. See, Bernier believed that, or he described that in India, crown land ownership was there. Okay, that is, all the land is in the hands of the crown, that is the king. That is, the king divided land to different nobles, and nobles give that land to different zamindars, and that zamindars will ask the peasants to cultivate in the land. Did you understand? The ownership of the land is with the king itself. Okay, king got the ownership. Then he will give this to his nobles. The nobles will give this to zamindars. And zamindars will ask the peasant to cultivate crops in those fields. Okay. So who is the owner of that land? Not the nobles, not the peasants, but who is the owner? It's the king. See, I'll tell you one example. I got 1 acre of land. So what will I do? Because I am an Indian and because we love our children so very much, we will give that land to our children, isn't it? Usually that is what happens. So I will always work hard in that field. Why? Because I want to give that land to my children. It is their legacy, isn't it? It is their legacy. But here what happens? The land ownership is with the king. See, whenever king fall out of favor with a noble, what he will do? He will take back that land and give to another noble. So that noble will never feel that that land is his. He cannot give that land to his children. It is not hereditary. So, I'll go to my own example. If I have a land, if I can give that to my children, what will I do? I will look after that land. I will try to make more money so that my children will be very happy. My children will be provided for, isn't it? But if that land is not mine, I am only working in that land, and after my death, that land will go back to the king. Then what will happen? Will I do that much? No. Whatever surplus money I get from that land will be taken by the king. So what will I do? I will not work hard, isn't it? I will do only as much as I want. See, if this month I need 10 rupees to live, I'll make only the product of 10 rupees. If I make 15 rupees, what is going to happen? The rest of the 5 will go to the king. So will I work that much? Will I be faithful to my land? No, I won't be, because that land is not mine. It is going back to the king, not to my children. So actually this is a problem, isn't it? If the land goes back to the king, why should I work? This is what François Bernier said. See, land, the problem in India is that of crown land ownership or crown ownership of the land. So that this land will revert back to the king, and the king will give that land to some other person. So that noble will not have any say in that matter. Okay, so according to Bernier, this is the problem. This was the problem in India at that time. That is the crown land ownership. Private ownership. He advocated private ownership as that in Western countries. Of course, that is correct, isn't it? In 10th standard, you must have studied about collectivization of land and all, isn't it? It was a flop actually. Why? Because we need to think that it is ours. But here that is not the case. The land will revert back to the king, so that I don't have any ownership on that, and I will not work as much. According to Bernier, this was the problem in India. Did you understand? So he thought that in order for a country to prosper, private ownership should be there, and that is true also, according to me. Okay. Now, he argued that lands under the crown ownership could not be passed to their children. So they were averse to any long-term investment in the sustenance and expansion of production. This is what I said earlier. See, if the land is going back to the crown, then why should I do long-term projects in that land? Why should I? Because whatever I do, it is going back to the king, and the king will give it to some other person. Okay. The absence of private property prevented the emergence of the class of improving landlords as it was in Western Europe to maintain and improve the land. See, if the land is my own, what will I do? I will try to improve the land. I will try to have more irrigation facilities. I will try to have 2 crops in a year. I would like to sustain that land, isn't it? But because of crown ownership, nobles are not doing these things. So who is going to suffer? Our country is going to suffer, isn't it? Who will suffer actually if we are not looking after our property properly? Who is going to suffer? Our country is going to suffer. So according to Bernier, that is why India is poor now, because of this crown ownership of land. Did you understand? Now, because of this crown ownership of land, people are not giving any importance to their land. It had ruined the agriculture and oppressed the peasants, and the living standards of all sections in the society declined except the ruling aristocracy. So because of this particular thing, that because of this one thing, that is crown ownership of land, it ruined the agriculture, oppressed the peasants and the living standards of all sections in the society, and only the ruling aristocracy got any benefit, because they get the land back, isn't it? So these are the demerits of crown ownership of the land. What are the demerits? Ruin the agriculture, oppress the peasants, and living standards of all sections in the society decline except the ruling aristocracy. Did you understand? According to François Bernier, why India was poor at that time? Because of the crown ownership of land. Why is that? Because a person, if he don't get land of his own, he will not give any importance to that particular land. Only for his personal benefit he will do that. Okay. So, because the surplus amount is going to whom? It is going to the king. And after his death, the land is going to whom? Not to his children, but to the king. So, this is the reason why India was poor. And according to Bernier, what was the demerits of crown ownership of land? It ruined the agriculture, oppressed the peasants, living standards of the sections of the society became very low. Only the ruling aristocracy got something out of it. Understand? Now, Bernier's description on the social condition of India. See, according to him, there was a wide gap between the rich and the poor. According to him, there is no middle way. Only extremely rich and extremely poor people were there. Why is that? Because of this crown ownership of land. See, people are not working to their potential, because whatever they make, the surplus will go to the king. So why should they work? So they are always poor. Because see, for example, if I need 10 rupees to live in a month, I am a poor person, I need only 10 rupees. So if I work hard, I can make 15 rupees and I can prosper. But that is not going to happen, because the rest of the 5 rupees, that is 10 rupees I will take, the rest of the 5 rupees will go to the king. Then how can a poor person become rich? He cannot. So according to Bernier, only rich people are there and poor people are there. There is no middle way. Understand? Okay. See, I'll read this. Bernier described Indian society as consisting of undifferentiated masses of a very rich and powerful ruling class. Very rich, powerful ruling class. There was a wide gap between the poorest of poor and richest of the rich. He says there is no middle state in India. Only the extremely rich and extremely poor people are there. Understand? See, and Bernier's description on the Mughal Emperor and his subjects. The next one is Bernier's description of the Mughal Emperor and his subjects. Okay. Bernier described the Mughal Empire as the king of beggars and barbarians. What do you mean by that? That is, he told us that only very rich people are there and very poor people are there. So, the Mughal Emperor is the king of poor people, that is beggars, and barbarians, that is we don't have any culture. He said Mughal Emperor was the king of beggars and barbarians. How untrue is that? According to him, Indians were barbarians. We don't have any culture. He thinks that only people in the Western countries got culture. Its cities and towns were ruined and contaminated with ill air, and its fields overspread with bushes and full of pestilential marishes. Okay, its cities and towns were ruined and contaminated, and ill air, and its fields overspread with bushes and full of pestilential marishes, that is with rubbish. See, all this again goes to his theory of crown ownership. Okay, that is because people could not have any wealth of their own. All cities and towns were ruined and contaminated with ill air, and its fields overspread with bushes and full of pestilential marishes. See, one thing is true. Okay, that is when Ibn Battuta came, it was in the 14th century. At that time, India was very prosperous, I told you earlier. When Al-Biruni came, it was in 11th century and extremely prosperous. When Bernier came, that was not the case. There were abject poverty in India, of course, but not to this extent. Okay. How did he describe our cities? Do you remember how Ibn Battuta described our cities and towns? In a glorious way, isn't it? But here Bernier is saying that its cities and towns were ruined and contaminated with ill air, and its fields overspread with bushes and full of pestilential marishes, that is rubbishes. Okay, he attributed all these problems to the crown ownership of land. Bernier says that there was the practice of crown ownership of land and no private ownership of land or private property. So according to the Bernier, there was no private property at all, only crown ownership of land was there. And he attributed everything, that is the deterioration of the culture, the deterioration of the money, everything to this one particular problem. Now, Bernier's description on the Mughal Emperor and his subjects. Again, see, how did he say that people are living in India, that is only very rich people are there and very poor people are there. Okay, but none of the Mughal official documents show that the state was the sole owner of land. According to the official chronicler of Akbar's reign, Abul Fazl, the Mughal Emperor collected only the remunerations from the people for the protection given by the state, and no rent was collected. See, according to Abul Fazl, who wrote, you have studied about Abul Fazl, remember, who was the official chronicler of Akbar. He said that, according to that chronicle, it is said that the remunerations were only the emperor collected the remunerations, not the rent. And why did the emperor collected the remuneration? So that he will give his protection to the people. But that may not be entirely true. Okay, see, who wrote all these things? Abul Fazl. On whose advice? On Akbar's advice. So what will he write? Only whatever he sold. This we are going to study in the next chapter. Okay, about Abul Fazl's chronicles. So in order to when a person in a king's court writes something, he will only showcase the good things, isn't it? And Bernier is showcasing only the bad things. So we need something in between. We need to see, we need to understand what happened, but we don't have that data with us. We got only the data written by François Bernier and data written by Abul Fazl. Did you understand what I am trying to say? That is, Bernier is saying everything bad about India, and Abul Fazl is saying that Abul Fazl is writing everything in a glorious way. There is no middle path. Like Bernier said, there is only richer people and very poor people. There is no middle path. Here also we don't have any middle path. We can read only the travelogues written by François Bernier and the chronicles written by Abul Fazl. But Abul Fazl said that there is no crown ownership like that. The crown only collected rent. Why? Because the crown need to protect the people, isn't it? So for that he collected rent. Okay. And for that they collected remuneration, no rent. That is, they collected tax. Why? So that the king is protecting the people. For that money is needed, army is needed, so many other facilities are needed. For that they are collecting remuneration, but no rent for tax was collected by the king. That was what Abul Fazl is saying. Bernier regarded the remuneration as land revenue since it was very high sometimes. So Bernier is saying that the amount collected from the peasants were very high. Okay, so it can we can say that that was the land revenue collected by the crown because it was very high. See, if as Abul Fazl is saying, if they are collecting, if the king is collecting only a certain money as remuneration for the protection given by the king, the remuneration will not be very high. But Bernier is saying that it is very high. The money is very high, so that we can think that it was land revenue. Contradictory statements by Bernier and Abul Fazl. Okay, you have to remember that. Contradictory statements made by François Bernier and Abul Fazl. So this crown ownership of land, 8-mark question, okay, it's an essay. See, now we are going to study about the idea of Oriental despotism. Okay, idea of Oriental despotism. Bernier's descriptions of land ownership influenced Western theories from the 18th century onwards. Oriental despotism means, what do you mean by that? That is dictatorship. Okay, one-man army, dictatorship, Oriental dictatorship. It was a concept made by some Westerners. Okay, so Bernier, according to Bernier, in 18th century, only in 18th century in Western countries they have private ownership, whereas in India we don't have private ownership, we got only crown ownership. So that is what they said, Oriental despotism. For instance, the French philosopher Montesquieu used Bernier's account and developed the idea of Oriental despotism. So who invented the idea of Oriental despotism? It was French philosopher Montesquieu. And from where did he got these ideas? From the things written by François Bernier. So who is the author of Oriental despotism? It was Montesquieu, French philosopher Montesquieu. Another 1-mark question. Okay, how did he came to this conclusion about Oriental despotism? Based on the writings of François Bernier. Now, according to this idea, in Asia, that is the Orient or the East, the kings enjoyed absolute authority over his subjects and owned all lands. This king enjoyed absolute authority over his subjects was correct, of course. At that time, it was like that. King was the supreme authority in India. Whether it is a Hindu king or a Muslim king, whatever it is, he got supreme command over the people. But about this land, as Abul Fazl said, it was not like that. Okay. There was no private property. All people except king and nobles struggled for survival. See, I told you, what did Bernier said? There were only very rich people and very poor people in India. Okay, there was no middle path. So, all people except the king and nobles in India struggle for survival. So, this is the concept of Oriental despotism. Understand? What is the concept of Oriental despotism? That is, king is the absolute authority in India. King got crown ownership of land. Because of that, only the king and the nobles were rich and all the other people were poor in India. This is known as Oriental despotism, and it was advocated by the French philosopher Montesquieu. Okay, based on Bernier's account. So for today, this much is enough. We will study. See, this portion is not finished, but we will study it in the next class. Okay, bye.